Today we're going to talk about modernism and the Hegelian dialectic. Hegelian refers to the German philosopher Georg Hegel, and dialectic is a way of investigating propositions for truth. So, Hegelian dialectic is just a method of philosophical inquiry. It's a system that Hegel devised as a way of getting to the bottom of philosophical arguments. For Hegel, every argument contains a thesis, which is a proposition. From that, you can derive an antithesis, which is the opposite of the thesis. Then, you can consider the thesis and antithesis together and come up with a synthesis, which is something in between the two ideas you started out with. Once you've derived the synthesis, you can set it up as the thesis of a new argument, then derive its antithesis, then a new synthesis, and so on. You can keep doing this forever, or anyway for as long as you like, and eventually this process will lead you to the truth. This diagram shows a way to think about Hegelian dialectic in a simple proposition about being. The opposite of being is nothing, and what runs between them is becoming. That is, nothing turns into being through becoming, and being turns into nothing through becoming. To think about this another way, make a very simple sentence. I am. What's the opposite? I am not. But in between them, I am becoming something if I am not, or I am becoming nothing if I am. The key structure in Hegelian dialectic is opposition. Hegel assumes that not only is opposition an important relationship between ideas, it is the most or maybe the only important relationship. Hegel thinks of opposition as a way to continue a conversation, and it does do that. But every conversation that comes out of opposition is just a conversation about things that are opposed. And we can't say, well, but synthesis, that's something new, because synthesis is designed just to become a new member of a pair of opposed things. There are many relations between things and ideas in the world. Few of them are about opposites, but Hegelian dialectic elevates opposition into the only relationship that matters. Still, if it gets us somewhere philosophically, why should we worry about that? It's because of what human beings do with opposites. Remember our early example of being versus nothing. Which of those is better? Being, right? I mean, who would say that nothing is better than being? In fact, if we are going to analyze our understanding of being by putting it in a relationship with nothing, we don't have to rank those two terms at all. We could just let them be themselves and call it a day. But people aren't really like that. We see two things that are opposed, and we say, which is the good one of those? So here are some examples of things that typically show up as opposites in the Hegelian dialectic. Look at this list. If you had to pick a more valued member of each pair based on what you know about our society, could you do that? In fact, most people in a given culture will rank things the same way, so these opposites carry unexamined biases and prejudices that come from culture. Now, look at the list again. Which of these things are really opposites? Which ones might have some relationship other than opposition? How might our philosophical inquiries benefit from thinking about these other relationships instead of stopping at the relationship of opposition? So, why is this a modernist concern? Hegel's ideas were prominent in the 19th century. All of the moderns would have learned this method as children, and the moderns were generally skeptical of anything that teacher told them was so. And they had good reason for being skeptical of this system. When they looked at it, even a little bit, they saw that it just replicates society's hierarchies without really interrogating them at all. This would not be to the moderns' tastes. What do the moderns do about this? Well, for the most part, they do not engage in direct arguing with the system. They don't do a logical takedown of it because they are skeptical of all the means of arguing they had learned. They don't know what to trust, essentially, so they start out by trusting nothing and expect that over time they will learn which systems are sound. Instead, in their art, they offer examples that can be interrogated. The advantage of this is that each example is unique and developed, so one can think about it richly, not in the stripped-down version Hegel offers. This also ties in with the modern interest in characters, in trying to represent human beings in all the complexity of consciousness, which is not a system that responds well to blinkered simplification. Now, I have some questions for you. What systems of two opposing elements does Joyce investigate in Portrait? I will give an example. Little Stephen, on the first page of the book, divides people into men and women and decides they are opposites of one another. There are no overlaps at all to the extent that he thinks the father is responsible for seeing and storytelling, and the mother is responsible for smell, touch, hearing, and taste. The father, and by extension all men, become associated with intellect. They are brains without bodies. Women, by contrast, are bodies without brains. When Stephen visits the prostitute at the end of chapter 2 and has sex for the first time, he has a problem because sex is something that happens in the body, but he's convinced himself that only women can be in the body. This makes his first sexual encounter less empowering than he had imagined it, because in order to feel pleasure in his body, he has to abandon what he understands as his masculinity. At the end of the book, his mother wishes that he will learn what the heart is and what it feels, and this is a very good wish for him. He has cut himself off from the part of his humanity that he associates with women, which is the body, affection, and feeling. To be a writer, he will need to understand how human beings work, which at this point in his life, he really doesn't. He says amen to his mother's wish, but then turns around and says, Old father, old artificer, stand me now and ever in good stead. In other words, he is offered a chance to rethink his dialectical views on gender so that he can move to a more human position. But the power of opposition is too strong for him. He prefers to continue thinking about gender the way he did when he was 2, even he acknowledges that without a more mature and complex view, he will never be an actual artist. Now, can you do the same thing with Mrs. Dalloway? What systems of two opposing elements does Woolf use? What is the effect of this on the novel?